Continuing to be, you were one of the pioneers in the turn of migration studies away from methodological nationalism and concepts that aren't so useful in studying how migrants and non-migrants' lives actually play out. You've placed various concepts under scrutiny, including ethnic segregation, immigrant communities, assimilation, integration, all of which continue to be regularly and uncritically used without, really much reflection at all. So I appreciate hearing the latest in what you and Nina Schiller have called the processual multiscalar analysis. I find this sort of perspective even moves beyond what we might call already traditional transnational migration studies and the post-migrant perspective as well. And I think the most important takeaway, I'll keep my comments short so we can have a few questions from the audience, is about breaking down this binary between migrants and non-migrants. You highlight that processes of capital accumulation encompass people everywhere within these mechanisms of dispossession, displacement, and emplacement. So, You also talked today about the common conditions of precarity that they share and the solidarities of the dispossessed in the quest for justice. And that's, the theme of this conference is borders and global justice. So if we really want to talk about that, about justice, then we literally can't continue to separate out migrants even analytically. So I have a question, and I know that this sort of analytical lens plays out in the analysis of what you study in the 3 cities, for example, the 3 dispossessed cities. But how does this reflect, or does it reflect in the method, in how you actually get data and study? And I also wonder, this is just sort of trying to keep the talks related from Nicholas's talk. I wonder how this sort of analytical lens would help in studying liminal spaces like refugee camps or these hot spots that he spoke of, where migrants are ultimately devalorized and there isn't a lot of this revalorization going on. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nadia. These are, of course, very big questions. Thank you very much, and they're good questions. In terms of the, you asked, I will start with your comment with that in terms of the transnational migration not being prone to methodological nationalism. Actually, it is not, because if you look at that, if you take ethnic lands as part of the methodological nationalism, and actually most of the transnational migration studies are very much through an ethnic lens in terms of the ethnic communities ideas, and partly also diaspora studies also go through that direction. And it is important to look at the kind of the connections of these people, but usually, for example, multi-sidedness is taken to be as if it were the monopoly of those transnational migrants. Actually, or I would just say that not multi-sided, but also multiscalar. That is, no matter we like it or not, all our lives are within that kind of transnational social fields. Either you're a migrant or not. But it has an impact actually singling out a kind of a category and not looking at it, the dynamics that they are shared by some others. It has consequences for policy. And in terms of that, what was your second question? I didn't write it there. But in terms of the method, you asked something. How to get gather data. Actually, to gather data, not only migrant-specific data. That is, in those cities, if we did not have looked at the city debt in terms of the unemployment rates, because usually migrant scholars look at it, that is, and compare in terms of what is the non-migrant unemployment rate and that one. But it does not look at it in terms of how, in very multiple ways, that the migrants are part of the city-making processes, but so many things that they share with the quote-unquote non-migrants. You could only see these in the broader perspective dynamic of that city-making. If you look at the statistics, actually, where the anthropologists very often do not look at the statistics. If we had remained within the narratives of the city officials, or that everyone we talked to in those cities, they were all talking about that. I mean, how the city is flourishing, how the city is attracting, how the city is gaining a kind of as being re-empowered, and how migrants are important. And then you look at it, what is done for those minorities and migrants in terms of, you don't see anything. And then you see that actually how that capital was attracted, and how did it affect all the people, all the urban residents. It was very striking, actually, in these three cities. They were I think the Halle was the second highest with the city debt, and Mardin was among the three, and Manchester also. In terms of, in all these periods, that the city debt increased in such a way, and they lost the commons, they lost the treasury land to corporate capital. If we did not look at those kind of statistics, then we would not have been able to situate those kind of the narratives, what they did and what they did not do. I mean, Mardin, with this project, actually the export increased 150%. Export volumes, but it was partly because of also the Iraq war. But not only that money did not come to the people. On the other hand, it created vulnerable, cheap labor force in terms of the displaced villagers. Not necessarily the Syrian Christians, but the Kurds, where the violence, not the legitimization of that kind of racializations in the fine way, they could always go to a very violent way, and there was the kind of an ongoing war, civil war there. And how would it help studying liminal spaces? And that's kind of where they are devalorized. I'm saying that actually this is part of it. That is, that devalorization is creating a particular kind of vulnerable labor force, and it is, you cannot look at the labor, as Nick had said, that without that relationship between capital and labor, you have to always look at that, the needs of the capital and how capital works as a social relations. That's why I said that it's not only the coloniality of power, which actually Nick is also underlining in terms of, is so intrinsic to, it's actually coloniality of capitalism that we could not differentiate. So I think you can look at those, but it depends on those areas that, I'm not saying that everyone does that, but actually people do not look at those devalorizations, dehumanizations, and sudden kind of revalorizations within migration, and sometimes, I hate to use that, but some kind of refugee industries, that they come together.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have time for just a couple of questions.
Yes, so thank you for a very lovely talk. I have one question. It has to do with methodological nationalism, and I think most of us would agree that it's not a good thing. On the other hand, this is just out of curiosity, how can you reconcile the desire to avoid methodological nationalism with, as the previous speaker said, the social fact of the nation state, a social fact that is a matter of life and death, and which could mean, on the one hand, soldiers and barbed wire, that could also mean, to misquote Harold Garfield, the ethno-methodological nationalism that we all perform in any society of who is one of us and who isn't. How should it be framed? On what scale should it be seen? How would you say that we deal with reconciling these two questions that seem to contradict each other? Thank you.
Should I respond? Yeah? Okay. Thank you very much. I'm not saying that it's a methodological nationalism does not mean that saying something against methodological nationalism does not mean that nation states do not have importance. But it is, I mean, of course they play an important role, but also in terms of the nation states have, I mean, it is about that the state territoriality. And in terms of the nation states, even the controlling the borders, which border, what kind of a border makes a big difference in terms of the location. And this modern border has been porous, actually, in terms of, and this is a very important border because the only land line from Europe went through to Iraq was through there. That is, that gate was, that road went through Mardin. That's why those exports 50% increase. But even within the sovereignty, that actually methodological nationalism tries to capture the fractured and variegated sovereignties of the nation state within that the analysis. So it is nothing to do with that kind of the nation states do not play an important role. Actually, in the Martin case that I was talking about, nation state played a very important role in terms of getting all these people, the people who fled their lives, getting them back from different parts of Europe, back to their quote-unquote ancestral land, but this group was able to reach to that nation, to Turkish state, through EU and through supranational organizations where they had acquired a power, a leverage at a particular conjuncture where Turkey was trying to negotiate EU accession, where they had to correct their horrible minority and religious rights record. So I don't see a kind of a contradiction in the sense, if I were to say that nation states do not have any power, but I'm just saying that what is happening, and then it's actually what Nick was saying, that is, I mean, the national economy that does not exist in that way. So trying to figure out, and this is the nativist, the problem of the nativist discourses and the populist discourses, at trying to show it as if it were the container. We know that it is not the container, and if we take in our analysis as the container, then I would not have been able to show actually this. I mean, there are X number of studies on Mardin, and I've never seen anywhere that actually there was a kind of a hidden NATO basis there, and very interesting, I would not say the most reliable, but very interesting material I was able to get, the hints from WikiLeaks. Actually, that's how much US was so present in the middle of nowhere kind of place. If I had looked at it only in terms of within the national frame, and the other one as external forces, I would not have been able to understand. I was able to understand how the Turkish state actually behaved vis-à-vis to this territory in relation to the broader outside of that container, what you call in German Gestalt.
So we have time if somebody has an ever so quick question.
Thank you. Your talk was really wonderful, and there was so many ideas, but I would like to focus just on the concept of emplacement.
Yes.
Talk about. So I study citizenship regime, and I think this concept is very useful to rethink the dichotomy among citizens and non-citizens, and can be used to rethink about citizenship as not based on national identity or belonging, but on participation. So I would like to hear you on this. Thank you.
Actually, this is one part of the book. It says actually looking at citizenship through this lens, and then in terms of even not only looking at its social citizenship in the usual way it is, but excavating the Latin origin of social as being fellowship, and fellows seeing themselves as being fellows in that, and how that has been created and the source of authority. Some people challenge the source of authority being in the nation state. I'm not also making an illusion that because nation states could do a lot in terms of negating your citizenship rights or participation rights, but Syrian Christians were citizens, and Kurds were also citizens, and it didn't hinder blocking their participation, but actually it was not. Nothing has changed in terms of their legal status of citizenship. So in terms of emplacement, and actually I wanted to also underline that these are the Rust Belt cities that kind of Rust Belt cities or deindustrialized cities, and we see that this is where that the kind of the, if you look at the terrains of the landscape of the votes and those movements, these are the places where you see very strong actually populist movements, but the others were also there, and I want to be optimistic. I don't want to leave the ground to populism.
All right, thank you very much again.